remember the first time I realized I was different. I was 8, and the dining room was filled with cigar smoke and laughter. My adoptive father, Richard, had his weekly poker night with his friends. They were gruff, loud men with big voices and bigger wallets, but they always had a soft spot for me. Lily, Richard called, a playful challenge in his voice. Think you're ready to join the big leagues? I grinned, my heart racing with excitement. Deal me in. The table erupted in laughter as I climbed onto the chair, my small frame dwarfed by the massive table. Richard shuffled the deck with practiced ease and dealt the cards. I stared at my hand, the wheels in my mind turning. Probability, patterns, risk. I could see it all like a puzzle begging to be solved. Each round, I calculated my odds, adjusting with every card revealed. The men around the table were seasoned players, but to me, their moves were predictable. A raised eyebrow here, a slight smirk there. I could read them like an open book. By the end of the night, I had a small pile of chips in front of me and the admiration of everyone at the table. Richard, your kid's a prodigy, one of his friends said, shaking his head in disbelief. She's sharper than half the guys I play with at the club. Richard beamed, his hand resting on my shoulder. That's my little math genius, he said proudly. You keep this up, Lily, and you'll outsmart us all. Those nights became our thing. Richard taught me the finer points of the game. Bluffing, strategy, reading people. It wasn't just a game to me. It was a way to connect with him, to feel seen and valued. I loved how he looked at me, like I was the most brilliant kid in the world. Then there was my little sister, Emma. Things were fine until she could walk and talk. My adoptive mother, Linda, couldn't stop fussing over her. Isn't she just perfect? Linda said, cradling Emma like she was made of porcelain. I wanted to be happy, but something shifted. Richard still called me his little math genius, but his focus began to drift. Linda's focus was already elsewhere. Every cry, every giggle from Emma drew their attention like a magnet. My achievements, a perfect math test, a chess championship, were met with distracted nods and half-hearted praise. Emma grew quickly, and so did her knack for getting attention. By the time she could talk, she had perfected the art of twisting stories to her advantage. If something broke, it was, Lily did it. If she wanted something, it was, Lily doesn't let me have it. It didn't matter if it was true. What mattered was that they believed her. I didn't fully understand it then, but the seeds of resentment and favoritism had been planted. While I was learning to calculate odds and bluff at a poker table, Emma was mastering the art of manipulation. And she was just getting started. At first, it was subtle. Little things like, Lily took my toy, or Lily won't let me play. I'd try to explain, but it never mattered. Emma had this way of tilting her head, her big blue eyes filling with tears that made her look like the most innocent victim in the world. And my parents fell for it every time. Lily, Linda would scold, her voice heavy with disappointment. Why can't you just be nice to your sister? I wanted to scream, I didn't do anything. But I'd learned early on that arguing only made it worse. Instead, I swallowed my frustration and retreated to my room, burying myself in my homework and puzzles. Numbers made sense when nothing else did. Meanwhile, Emma thrived under the spotlight. Every little thing she did became a reason for celebration. When she played a tree in her kindergarten play, Linda gushed as if Emma had delivered a Broadway performance. She's so talented, don't you think, Richard? Linda said, snapping endless photos. Sure is, Richard replied, barely glancing up from his newspaper. I rolled my eyes, biting back the urge to point out that Emma had spent the entire play waving at the audience instead of acting. Instead, I focused on my math notebook, sketching out solutions to a complex problem I'd been working on for days. I didn't need their approval. I had my own goals. But even my biggest accomplishments seemed invisible to them. I'd come home clutching trophies from math competitions and blue ribbons from science fairs, my heart swelling with pride, only to be met with lukewarm congratulations. That's nice, Lily, Linda would say, glancing over her shoulder while she painted Emma's nails. Put it on the shelf with the others. Nice? I wanted to scream. I just won a state championship. One evening, I overheard Linda on the phone with one of her friends. Oh, Emma's just a natural star, she said, her voice brimming with pride. Lily? She's, good at school stuff. School stuff. That was all I was to them. A quiet, studious kid who blended into the background while Emma shone center stage. The worst part wasn't their indifference. It was how quickly they believed the lies Emma told about me. If I tried to stand up for myself, Emma would twist the story to make me look cruel or selfish. Lily yelled at me for no reason, she'd sob, or Lily doesn't want me to be happy. And they always believed her. I stopped trying to explain myself after a while. What was the point? The harder I worked, the less they seemed to notice. My world became smaller. Just me, my books, and the poker table with Richard's friends. At least there, I felt like I mattered. Everywhere else, I was just Lily, the afterthought. My family had always been a fragile balance, like a tower of cards swaying on the brink. But Emma's 16th birthday was the shove that made it all come crashing down. The house was decked out in pink and gold, streamers and balloons draped over every surface. Emma had insisted on a huge party, complete with a 3-tier cake and a DJ. And of course, Linda and Richard delivered. They always did when it came to Emma. Lily, grab the extra plates from the kitchen, Linda barked as she adjusted Emma's tiara for the 100th time. I was barely in the door from school, my backpack still slung over one shoulder. Without a word, I set down my things and headed to the kitchen, biting back the urge to remind her I wasn't a caterer. By the time the guests arrived, I was exhausted. I didn't even have time to change out of my school clothes before Linda shoved me into the background to serve drinks and clear plates. I didn't mind staying out of sight, though. Watching Emma bask in everyone's attention was nauseating. Then it happened. One of Emma's friends handed her a glittery gift bag. It's a limited edition charm bracelet, the friend gushed as Emma tore into the wrapping. Oh my gosh, I love it, Emma squealed, holding the bracelet up for everyone to admire. Somehow, a few minutes later, that bracelet ended up on the floor, crushed underfoot. What did you do? Emma screamed, her eyes locking onto me like a predator spotting its prey. What? I said, confused. I didn't. She broke it, Emma shouted, tears streaming down her face. I saw her. She stepped on it on purpose because she's jealous of me. Emma, that's not true, I stammered, panic rising in my chest. I didn't even touch it. But it didn't matter. Linda and Richard were already storming toward me, their faces red with anger. Lily, how could you? Linda hissed, her voice shaking with rage. On Emma's birthday, no less. I didn't. Don't lie, Richard snapped. You've always been so bitter about Emma. This is just another way for you to ruin things for her. Bitter? Ruin? I felt like I'd been slapped. I would never. Go to your room, Lily, Linda said, her voice cold and final. You've done enough. I retreated, the humiliation burning in my chest. As I shut my bedroom door, I could still hear Emma sobbing dramatically downstairs, milking every second of the attention. A few months later, on the morning of my 18th birthday, the final blow came. I'd woken up hoping for a sliver of acknowledgement, a card, a happy birthday, anything. Instead, Richard called me into the living room with Linda and Emma sitting on the couch like a tribunal. Lily, Richard began, his tone heavy. It's time we had a serious conversation. I sat down, bracing myself. What's going on? Linda took a deep breath. You're 18 now, and it's time for you to start your own life. I blinked. What are you talking about? We can't keep supporting you, Richard said, his words like a punch to the gut. It's not fair to Emma. She has so much potential, and we need to focus on giving her the opportunities she deserves. I stared at them, stunned. You're kicking me out? On my birthday? It's not like that, Linda said, feigning concern. We're just saying you need to stand on your own 2 feet. It's for your own good. For my own good? My voice cracked. You're throwing me away like I'm nothing. Don't be dramatic, Lily, Emma chimed in, smirking from her spot on the couch. It's not like you've ever really fit in here. The words hit harder than I expected. I looked at Richard and Linda, searching their faces for any sign of regret or hesitation. There was none. You've always been so difficult, Richard said, shaking his head. We've done our best. But it's clear you're not happy here. Maybe some distance will help. I wanted to scream, to throw every injustice they'd ever inflicted on me back in their faces. But what was the point? They'd made up their minds. I was expendable to them. Fine, I said, my voice hollow. I'll leave. That evening, I packed what little I had into a battered suitcase. As I zipped it shut, Emma appeared in the doorway, a smug grin on her face. Don't forget to leave your house key, she said sweetly. I clenched my fists, but said nothing. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. And as I walked out the door, Linda and Richard didn't even come to say goodbye. Emma stood on the porch, waving like I was just another guest leaving one of her parties. I stepped onto the sidewalk, my heart breaking, but my resolve hardening with every step. They'd taken everything from me. My home, my family, my sense of belonging. But as I turned the corner, one thought burned bright in my mind. They'll regret this. Someday, they'll see what they lost. I stepped off the bus and into the dazzling chaos of Las Vegas, clutching a beat-up suitcase and a wallet that was barely holding on. The Strip was overwhelming. Bright lights, noisy crowds, and an energy that felt alive. I'd never seen anything like it, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I belonged there. But this was my last shot. If I failed here, I didn't know what I'd do next. The first casino I walked into felt like another world. The sound of slot machines clinking, people cheering, and cards shuffling was almost hypnotic. It smelled like perfume and desperation, but I wasn't there to admire the scenery. I was there to survive. I didn't have much left, just $100 after paying for the bus ride and food. It wasn't a lot, but it was all I needed to get started. I found a small blackjack table with low stakes and sat down, my hands shaking as I slid a $20 bill to the dealer. He handed me a few chips, and I took a deep breath. Good luck, the dealer said, giving me a polite nod. I forced a smile. I needed more than luck. I needed every bit of skill I'd learned from years of playing cards with my dad and his friends. I'd been counting cards since I was a kid. It was practically second nature by now. This was the moment to put it to the test. The first hand was nerve-wracking. My heart pounded as I calculated the odds in my head. I had a 16 and the dealer showed a 10. I hit and the card came, a 5, blackjack. I let out a shaky breath as the small pile of chips in front of me grew slightly. One win down. I reminded myself not to get greedy. The key was to blend in, not draw attention. I played carefully, making sure to lose a few hands here and there. When I cashed out after a few hours, I'd turned $20 into $200. It wasn't life-changing, but it was enough for a motel room and dinner. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control over my life. So over the next few weeks, I became a regular on the casino floors. I learned to dress the part, wearing just enough to fit in, but not enough to stand out. I smiled at the dealers and made small talk with the other players, acting like I was just another tourist. But behind the casual facade, my mind was always working, counting cards, calculating odds, and reading the table. I never stayed too long at one place, and I never won too much in one sitting. The trick was to stay under the radar. If anyone suspected I was counting cards, I'd be kicked out, or worse. So I made sure to lose sometimes, to look frustrated, and to keep my wins subtle. It worked. By the end of the month, I had enough saved to put me through a semester of college. That realization hit me one night as I counted my cash in the dingy motel room I was staying in. I'd come to Vegas with nothing, and now I was piecing my life back together. It wasn't just about the money, though. Each day, I felt my confidence grow. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. This was my life, my choices, and my success. Then came the night that changed everything. I was leaving a casino after another successful round when a man approached me. He was tall and well-dressed, with a sharp smile that made me immediately wary. "You're good," he said, his voice smooth. "I've been watching you." My stomach dropped. Was he security? Did they finally catch on? "Relax," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm not here to bust you. I'm here because I see potential." He handed me a business card. "There's a high-stakes poker tournament next week. Big buy-in, even bigger prize. I think you could clean up." I looked at the card and felt my heart race. The buy-in was astronomical, almost everything I'd saved so far, but the prize was life-changing. It wasn't just money, it was a way out. "Think about it," the man said, before walking away. I stared at the card all the way back to my motel. Could I really risk everything I'd worked so hard to save? College had been my goal all along, but this was an opportunity I might never get again. By the time I got to my room, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't just gambling with cards anymore. I was gambling on myself. The day of the tournament felt surreal. The room buzzed with energy. An air of confidence and intensity radiated from every player. This was no friendly casino floor. These were seasoned professionals, sharks circling for their next victim. I tried not to let it rattle me as I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. My savings had bought me a seat at the table, but I couldn't afford to lose. Everything I had was on the line, not just the money, but the chance to prove I could rise above everything that had been thrown at me. If I failed here, I wasn't sure what would come next. The competition was brutal from the start. These players weren't just skilled, they were calculated, ruthless, and intimidating. Each one had their own style, some flashy, others stone-faced, but all of them knew how to play the psychological game. The first few hands were about feeling out the table. I stayed cautious, folding when the stakes got too high and making modest bets when I saw an opening. I let them think I was nervous, a rookie who didn't belong here. It worked, at least for a while. One player, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit with a smirk that screamed arrogance, started targeting me. He'd raise the stakes every time I bet, trying to scare me into folding. I could hear the subtle chuckles from the other players, enjoying the show. But I wasn't scared. I was calculating. Each time he raised, I paid attention to the way his hand tapped the table or how his eyes darted to his chips. I started to see his patterns, his tells. On the next hand, I called his bluff with a straight flush. The look on his face when I raked in the chips was priceless. As the hours passed, the field narrowed. One by one, players were eliminated, and the stakes grew higher. The crowd around us thickened, spectators whispering and cheering as the action unfolded. I could feel their eyes on me, but I blocked it out, focusing on the game. By the time we reached the final table, my hands were steady, my mind sharp. The remaining players were some of the best, their reputations intimidating enough to make most people fold before the cards were even dealt. But I wasn't most people. The final hand was a test of nerves. It was me against a man known as the Professor, a poker legend with decades of experience. His calm demeanor never wavered, even as the pot grew to an astronomical amount. I studied him as the dealer flipped the flop, the turn, and finally the river. My cards were decent, a pair of queens, not unbeatable, but strong enough to fight for. He raised, I matched. The crowd held its breath. Then he went all in. The tension in the room was thick. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what I'd do. My heart raced, but my mind was clear. I thought about every hand he'd played that night, every move he'd made. He was trying to intimidate me, to force me to back down. I smiled, pushing my entire stack into the pot. Call! The room erupted as the cards were revealed. His face fell when he saw my full house, a pair of queens and 3 tens. The crowd cheered as I raked in the massive pile of chips. I had done it. I had won. The tournament director handed me a giant check for $5 million. It felt heavy in my hands, not just because of the money, but because of what it represented. This wasn't just a win, it was a fresh start, a new life. As I left the casino that night, I didn't feel like the same person who had walked in. I wasn't the girl who'd been thrown away anymore. I was someone who had fought for her future, and won. When I left Vegas with my $5 million winnings, I felt invincible. But I also knew I needed to be smart. The money was my ticket to a better future, but it wasn't infinite. I needed to make it work for me, to create something lasting. I wasn't about to gamble with my future, not this time. That's when the idea hit me. I'd always been fascinated by numbers and patterns, not just in poker, but in life. My mind was wired to spot trends, and I wanted to use that skill to help others. Financial decisions, investments, market analysis, they all boiled down to numbers, patterns, and probabilities. What if I could combine my talent with technology to create something revolutionary? An AI-driven financial analysis platform. That was the vision. I used a chunk of my winnings to rent a modest office space and hired a small team of talented, passionate developers and data scientists. These weren't just any hires. They were people who believed in innovation, who weren't afraid to take risks. I wanted a team that shared my drive, The idea was to build a platform that would democratize financial analysis, using AI to provide real-time, actionable insights for businesses and individual investors alike. It wasn't just about crunching numbers, it was about making finance accessible to everyone, not just Wall Street elites. We called it visionary analytics. Starting a company wasn't as glamorous as it sounded. I quickly learned that being a young woman in tech came with its own set of challenges. Investors looked at me and saw someone they didn't take seriously, just a kid with a lucky poker streak and no business running a startup. "What makes you think you can handle this?" one investor asked during a pitch meeting. He leaned back in his chair, smirking like he'd already decided I wasn't worth his time. I smiled, keeping my cool. "Because I've already bet on myself and won. I didn't come here for luck. I came here to change the game." Winning people over wasn't easy, but I refused to give up. I knew my platform could make waves if given the chance. Slowly but surely, I started to build credibility. Investors who initially brushed me off came back for second meetings. My team and I worked tirelessly, often pulling all-nighters, fueled by coffee and a shared belief in our vision. The first big break came when we signed our first major client, a mid-sized investment firm looking to gain a competitive edge. Our platform's beta version helped them spot market trends before their competitors, earning them record profits in a single quarter. Word spread quickly. Soon, more companies lined up to try our product. The media started to take notice, and interviews followed. Headlines like "The Poker Pro Turned Tech Prodigy" and "Visionary Analytics, the Startup Disrupting Wall Street" began popping up. The recognition was thrilling, but it also came with pressure. Investors poured in, and the stakes grew higher. But I thrived under pressure. It reminded me of the poker tables, where every decision mattered. The difference was, this time, I wasn't playing for myself. I was building something bigger. Within 3 years, Visionary Analytics became a force in the industry. Major financial institutions signed on as clients, and our AI platform was hailed as a disruptor. My team grew from a scrappy group of 5 to a thriving company of over 100 employees. I didn't just find success, I built it from scratch, brick by brick, against every odd. And as I stood in our gleaming new headquarters, looking out at the city skyline, I couldn't help but smile. They had thrown me away, but I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving, and I wasn't done yet. When I first saw the email from Sterling Global, I thought it was spam. $3 billion for my company? I had to blink a few times and reread the email before it sunk in. This was real. Sterling Global, one of the biggest corporations in the world, wanted to buy Visionary Analytics, the startup I built from scratch. My hands actually shook as I read the offer. It felt surreal. Just a few years ago, I was scraping by in Vegas, trying to survive. Now I was sitting on something so valuable that global giants were willing to spend billions for it. But it wasn't just about the money. Visionary Analytics was my baby, my proof to the world and to myself that I was worth something. Letting go wasn't going to be easy. The first meeting with Sterling Global was nerve-wracking. Their CEO, a guy named Richard, looked every bit the corporate big shot. Gray hair, tailored suit, that smug aura of someone used to getting his way. I, on the other hand, was just me. But I wasn't about to let him intimidate me. As we sat across the long conference table, Richard leaned back and smiled. $3 billion, that's our final offer. I could feel my heart racing, but I kept my face calm. I smiled back. "It's a great offer," I said, "but Visionary Analytics isn't just a company. It's a game changer, and I think you know it's worth more than just a number." His smile faltered for just a second. It was subtle, but I caught it. She's not going to roll over. I could almost hear him think. Thanks to my ability, I knew exactly what he was worried about. I was younger, hungrier, and I wasn't going to settle. Negotiations went on for hours. Sterling Global's lawyers threw around big words and complicated terms, trying to push me into a corner, but I was ready. I'd done my homework, studied every angle, and had a team of my own backing me up. By the end of the day, we struck a deal. $3 billion was still the number, but I made sure there were perks. My team and I would stay on for 2 years to oversee the transition, and we'd get a percentage of future profits. It wasn't just about the money. It was about showing them that I wasn't some young founder they could steamroll. When the contracts were ready, I signed my name at the bottom and leaned back in my chair. The room burst into applause, but I felt oddly calm. This was it. The company I'd built with late nights, stress, and more coffee than was healthy was no longer mine. A part of me felt a little sad, like I was saying goodbye to a piece of myself. But mostly, I felt proud. I'd done something incredible, something no one could ever take away from me. Selling visionary analytics changed my life overnight. Articles about the deal popped up everywhere. Headlines like From Vegas to Billionaire, Lily Carter's Inspiring Journey made me laugh out loud. The girl who was kicked out of her family home was now making waves on the global stage. With $3 billion in the bank, I could have retired comfortably, never lifting a finger again. But I wasn't done yet. This wasn't just about money, it was about legacy. I wanted to use my success to create something lasting, to prove to the world and to myself that I was more than just the girl they had discarded. As I stood in the penthouse of my new apartment, overlooking the city skyline, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I had come so far, but the journey wasn't over. There were still wrongs to right, people to face, and a past to confront. I wasn't just wealthy, I wasn't just successful, I was powerful. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I deserved it. It started as a curiosity. I hadn't thought about my family in years, not seriously, anyway. But as the dust settled after selling my company, something in me wondered, what had become of them? Last I heard, Emma was working at the family business. I figured she was probably running it into the ground. It didn't take much digging to confirm my suspicion. A quick search led me to some troubling headlines about their company, Carter and Company. Once a well-regarded family business, it was now making news for all the wrong reasons. Lawsuits, missed deliveries, plummeting stock prices. I read through reports of Emma's questionable leadership, lavish office renovations, reckless investments, and a failure to adapt to the changing market. It was almost laughable. She had been handed everything on a silver platter and still managed to mess it all up. But the more I dug, the more I realized it wasn't just incompetence, it was arrogance. Emma thought she was untouchable, spending the company's money like it would never run out. With my new resources and connections, it was easy to dig deeper. I hired a private investigator to look into Carter and Co.'s financial records. What they found didn't surprise me. The company was hemorrhaging money, and the family was desperately trying to cover it up. Their once comfortable lifestyle had taken a hit, too. The investigator sent me photos of Emma shopping at high-end stores, her arms full of bags, while creditors filed lawsuits against the company. My parents weren't much better. They still lived in the big house I grew up in, but they were taking out loans to keep up appearances. One night, I sat in my penthouse, scrolling through the investigator's latest report. It hit me. This was my chance. The family who threw me out, who replaced me with their golden child, was now crumbling under the weight of their own bad choices. I could help them. Or I could do what they did to me. I called my financial advisor the next morning. How much would it take to buy a controlling stake in Carter and Company? I asked. Controlling stake? Lily, why would you want... He stopped himself. Actually, never mind. Let me look into it. A few hours later, he called back with the numbers. It wasn't cheap, but it was doable. The company's shares were trading at a fraction of their previous value, making it the perfect time to strike. The transaction went through without a hitch. By the end of the week, I owned a majority stake in Carter and Company. It was official. I was the largest shareholder of the company that my family had run for decades, and they had no idea. I didn't storm in or make a dramatic announcement. Not yet. Instead, I let the news circulate quietly. Emma and my parents would eventually find out, and when they did, I wanted it to be on my terms. As I sat in my office, staring at the documents that confirmed my ownership, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, definitely. Maybe even a little vindication. But mostly, I felt ready. Ready to confront them, ready to show them who I'd become. They thought they had written me out of their story. But now, I held the pen. And this time, I was writing the ending. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension, but I felt calm. This moment had been years in the making, and I was ready. The heavy oak doors swung open, and I stepped inside, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The room was packed, board members in tailored suits, my parents at the head of the table, and Emma sitting smugly by their side. That smugness evaporated the moment she saw me. "Lily?" My mother gasped, her voice trembling. Good morning, everyone, I said, ignoring her. I walked to the front of the room, where the head chair was conspicuously empty. I placed my documents neatly on the table and turned to face them. My father leaned forward, his brow furrowed. What are you doing here? I let a small smile cross my lips. I'm here because I'm your new CEO. The silence was deafening. Emma's face turned pale, and my mother's mouth fell open. My father shook his head as though trying to process what I'd just said. That's impossible, he said firmly. You don't have a stake in this company. I raised an eyebrow. Actually, I do. I now own a majority stake in Carter, and company bought it fair and square. And as the largest shareholder, I've appointed myself as the new CEO. I slid the paperwork across the table. It's all legal. You're welcome to review it. One of the board members picked up the documents, scanned them quickly, and nodded. She's right, he said, his voice low. It's legitimate. Emma shot out of her chair. This is ridiculous. You can't just waltz in here and take over everything. Actually, I can, I replied, keeping my tone cool. That's what happens when you own the majority of the company. But don't worry, Emma, I have plans for you. Her eyes narrowed. Plans? What's that supposed to mean? I turned to the board members. Let's get one thing straight. This company is on the brink of collapse because of mismanagement. Lavish spending, poor investments, and complete disregard for financial stability have driven us to the edge. That ends today. I walked around the table, my gaze sweeping over everyone. I have a plan to save this company, but it means cutting out the rot, starting with those who got us into this mess. I stopped in front of Emma. Effective immediately, you are demoted to a junior administrative role. You'll answer to the new head of operations and focus on basic tasks. Maybe you'll learn a thing or two about responsibility. You can't do this, Emma snapped, her voice trembling with rage. You're just doing this to humiliate me? No, Emma, I said sharply. You humiliated yourself. You used this company like your personal piggy bank, and now we're paying the price. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to clean up your mess. I turned to my parents. And as for you two, you're being removed from all decision-making roles. You'll retain your shares, but you'll have no say in how this company is run. My father slammed his fist on the table. You can't just push us aside like this. Actually, I can, I said calmly. You've had decades to prove yourselves, and this is where it got us. It's time for a change. The board members exchanged glances, nodding slowly. One of them spoke up. Miss Carter, Miss Lily, what's your plan to turn this company around? I straightened my shoulders. I'm glad you asked. First, we'll be cutting all unnecessary expenses. No more lavish spending. Second, I'm bringing in new leadership, people with real experience. And third, we'll focus on innovation. This company has been stuck in the past for too long. As I outlined my vision, I noticed the board members leaning in, nodding in agreement. Even the ones who had seemed skeptical at first were now paying close attention. By the time I finished, there was a round of applause. As the board members began filing out, my parents stayed rooted to their seats. Emma looked like she was on the verge of tears. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. You think you've won, but you're just as pathetic as you've always been. I leaned in, my voice steady. The difference, Emma, is that I've worked for everything I have. You've been handed everything and still managed to ruin it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to save. I turned and walked out of the boardroom, my head held high. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The day after the boardroom takeover, I sat in my new office, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. It was surreal. The very company that had cast me aside was now mine to run. But the day wasn't over, and there was one thing left to deal with: my adoptive parents. I didn't expect them to come to me, but there they were, standing awkwardly in the doorway of my office. My mother clutched her handbag tightly, her face pale. My father, usually so authoritative, looked unsure of himself. Lily, my mother started, her voice shaky. We need to talk. I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. Have a seat. They sat down, exchanging nervous glances. I waited, letting the silence stretch. Finally, my father cleared his throat. We owe you an apology, he said, for everything, for not believing in you, for treating you as less than family. His words hung in the air, but they didn't land the way he intended. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Why now? I asked. My tone was calm, but I could see the question made them flinch. Because I'm in charge now? Because you're scared of what I might do? My mother's eyes filled with tears. No, Lily, it's not just that. We've realized how unfair we were to you, how blind we were to Emma's manipulations. You didn't deserve the way we treated you. I took a deep breath, letting their words sink in. You didn't just treat me unfairly. You threw me away. You told me to leave because you didn't have space for me in your lives. Do you know how that felt? My father looked down at his hands. My mother sobbed quietly. We can never undo what we did, she said. But we want to make amends, if you'll let us. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling city below. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, of hearing them admit their mistakes. But now that it was here, it felt hollow. I appreciate the apology, I said, turning back to face them. But forgiveness doesn't come that easily. I'm willing to keep things professional for the sake of the company, but that's all. Don't expect more than that. They nodded, their expressions a mix of relief and sadness. It wasn't the answer they wanted, but it was the one they deserved. Later that week, I caught wind of Emma's latest scheme. She had tried to access sensitive company files to sabotage my plans. It didn't take much to trace the activity back to her. When confronted, she burst into tears, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. Emma, I said coldly, you've done nothing but destroy everything you've touched. This ends now. I called security to escort her out of the building. She screamed and cried, begging me to give her another chance. But I didn't waver. You wanted everything handed to you, Emma? I said as she was led away. Now you'll learn what it's like to start from nothing. After Emma was gone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The family that had once controlled my life no longer held any power over me. I was free to move forward, to build something better for myself and the company. Rebuilding relationships was a process, but I knew one thing for certain: I would never let anyone diminish my worth again.